This is the story of a multilateral development bank with big ambitions. A bank that wanted to promote prosperity and growth in Asia through major infrastructure projects. A bank that promised to deliver capital to the countries of the Global South, faster and easier than other development banks. A bank committed to sustainability in line with the 1.5-degree target of the Paris Climate Agreement, and a bank that wanted to do all this while maintaining the highest social and environmental standards. The name of this bank is Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB.
We have given ourselves 3 operating principles that you may have heard about. They are clean, green, and lean.
It all sounded very promising. This bank could have been a pioneer in the world of development banks. But 7 years after it started operation, there is still a huge gap between ambitions and reality. Since 2016, 260 infrastructure projects with an investment volume of $51 billion have been approved. Seemingly a good start, but the price has been human suffering. A coalition of international human rights organizations has criticized the AIIB for a lack of meaningful consultation with people affected by its projects, failure to provide adequate information, ignoring human rights abuses committed by project partners, including involuntary resettlement, intimidation, and violence, an inadequate grievance redress mechanism, and last but not least, the continued funding of fossil fuel projects.
To improve the livelihood of the people.
In September of 2023, the German environmental and human rights organization Urgewald partnered with several international NGOs to organize a conference, bringing together affected people, the AIIB's management, the bank's European shareholders, and civil society actors. Germany is a founding member and the largest shareholder of the bank outside of Asia. As such, Germany has a special responsibility to ensure that the AIIB's projects comply with international standards on the environment, human rights, and transparency. The aim was to confront the bank and the shareholders with the yawning gap between its promises and reality, in the hope that the AIIB can be persuaded to change its course. When the AIIB began operating in 2016, much of the international community welcomed it. The bank, an initiative of China, was widely seen as an opportunity to break up the Western-dominated financial architecture and give greater weight to countries in the Global South. China quickly persuaded more than 50 countries around the world to join, but there was also much concern that the bank could serve China's interests only. The United States and Japan notably did not join. Nevertheless, the AIIB promised to be an international bank, not a Chinese one. But in June of 2023, the AIIB's Canadian Communications Director Bob Pickard spectacularly fled China. He sees the bank as dominated by communist bureaucrats, and he complains about a toxic working atmosphere. But above all, he questioned the integrity of the entire bank. His allegations prompted Canada to freeze its membership in the AIIB. The bank has categorically denied all allegations. Nevertheless, the AIIB is still widely perceived as primarily serving Chinese interests, and China's dominant role is plain to see.
The AIIB is not, as promised, a very open democratic institution, but in the hand of the communist leadership in China.
China holds 26% of the votes in the bank. This means no project can be approved without China's will. In addition, the bank's unusual governing structure gives its president extraordinary power. He can approve many projects on his own without having to consult the board. The board of directors is severely limited in its oversight role because it is not based at the bank's headquarters in Beijing. And despite all promises, transparency towards civil society is still insufficient.
Multilateral development banks tell their own fairy tales. The US-dominated World Bank, the Japan-dominated Asian Development Bank, and also the China-dominated AIIB. But this bank is a young bank and promises to be a forerunner, not a laggard. It has to take accountability and be really a bank of the 21st century.
So let's measure the AIIB by its own standards, of which it continues to be proud.
The bank does have high standards, and these are modeled on the World Bank. And in the environment, social and governance sphere, I think we do not have to hide ourselves.
Yes, the AIIB has modeled its environmental and social guidelines on those of the World Bank, which have always been considered the gold standard. But the truth is that this modeling happened at a time when the World Bank had just significantly weakened its environmental and social framework.
It's now much more flexible, much more friendly to the clients and not to the affected communities.
So far, we have talked about the bank, its grandiose promises, and the concerns of its critics. Now it's time for a look at the reality of AIIB policies from the perspective of those on the ground. The Bola Integrated Power Plant IPP is a gas-fired power plant co-financed by the AIIB with a capacity of 220 megawatt. Although a fossil fuel project, the bank calls it sustainable technology for the future. Its carbon dioxide equivalent emissions amount to more than 500,000 tons per year, nearly 10% of Bangladesh's total. But in Bola, the AIIB not only undermines its own claim to be a green bank, it also reveals serious shortcomings in the implementation of fundamental environmental and social standards.
তারপরে বিদ্যুৎ কোম্পানি হওয়ার পরে হিরিও নিছে কিন্তু শুনতেছি আরও বিদ্যুৎ কোম্পানি আসবে তাহলে আমাগো কি অবস্থা হইব আমাগো বাসার কোনো জায়গা আছে না রাস্তা আছে
হ্যাঁ তো হ্যাঁ গো তোরে নিয়ে তো আর আমাকে কষ্ট হয় আমরা এই পানি দিয়ে কিছুই করতে পারি না এখানের ময়লা আবর্জনা এই এত বিশ্রী গন্ধে অনেক কষ্টে আছি আমরা বাইরে থেকে কত কষ্টে 2-3 কিলোমিটার দূরে থেকে পানি আমরা রান্না বান্না করতে হয় ধোয়া পোছা সব করতে হয়
A comprehensive 2018 study found that virtually none of the environmental and social standards had been properly implemented. According to the study, the affected communities were not adequately informed about the project. People were pressured to sell their land. Many received inadequate compensation. Negative environmental impacts were not considered. Conservation laws were violated, and the existential threat of people losing their homes, jobs, and a clean environment was ignored. But what about the bank's complaint mechanism? Is it not open to all those harmed by the project?
They formed a grievance redress committee, which is led by the person who purchased the whole land. Okay, so it's a directly conflict of interest, and people will not go to you when you are the agent for purchasing the land and you are the head of this grievance redress committee.
The complaints mechanism that the affected communities invoked for the first time in the bank's history ultimately rejected their concerns. The reason that was given, the complainants had not made sufficient efforts to find a solution before filing their case. Even today, the people in the affected communities, mothers and children, fishermen, or like here, betel farmers, are desperately waiting for a just solution. Is the AIIB's failure in Bola an isolated case? Critics who have observed the bank for years see a systemic denial of responsibility.
The AIIB has got an accountability problem. In fact, I'd go so far as to say it's an accountability crisis. This is a bank that has existed for 7 years, and they haven't accepted a single complaint about their projects. And they like to almost say, oh, we're doing a good job. That's why nobody is complaining. But actually what they've done is design their accountability mechanism in such a way that affected communities simply cannot access.
The AIIB has designed its accountability mechanism so that its own environmental and social standards no longer need to be implemented when another bank is the main financier. In Bangalore, India, students at a technical school for hearing impaired experienced the far-reaching consequences of this policy. The AIIB is co-financing the expansion of India's second-longest metro network in Bangalore. The project aims to provide an efficient and sustainable public transportation solution to alleviate traffic congestion in the rapidly growing city. A project that is in line with the bank's sustainability promises. But
we found especially one particularly vulnerable community that was really adversely impacted by this Bangalore Metro project, which was co-financed by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. And that's when we started getting involved with the students who were speech and hearing impaired students, because they were like left in a kind of no man's land.
the Technical Institute for the Deaf enabled students from poor families to obtain a vocational qualification, giving them a chance to earn an income of their own. But the school stood in the way of the infrastructure project. The demolition excavator arrived just before the students' final exams, according to Growth Watch, which lobbied the AIIB on behalf of the students. There was no meaningful consultation and no due diligence done before the demolition.
And when we brought the issue to them, while again we got very positive response, saying, oh yes, we will handle it, etc. What they did is they just shoved us, we are co-financing. The European Investment Bank and its safeguards will look after you. So please go in that direction and everything will be handled.
But the European Investment Bank, which provided the bulk of the funding, could not meet the most important demand: compensation for 3 years of harm suffered. None of the banks feel responsible for the students' fate. After years of struggle, this is the sobering conclusion.
The issue of reparations for harm done to the project impacted is out there in the open.
The AIIB is the main financier of around 40 to 50% of its projects. For the other half, it only acts as a co-financier.
So that means actually for 60%, about 60% of their portfolio, the AIIB mechanism is not the responsible mechanism. So that leaves about 40 to 50%, which it is. And of those, half of them are financial intermediation projects, for which it's not transparent whether a bank finances their project or not.
Financial intermediaries include credit brokers for microloans. No country in the world has more microlending than Cambodia. In 2022, the AIIB made an investment of $175 million in 2 lending companies in Cambodia, at a time when microloans had long fallen into disrepute. Providing small loans to people who would otherwise have no access to credit was once seen as a revolutionary way to fight poverty. The founder of the idea, Muhammad Yunus, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. But as the international financial industry found microcredit to be a lucrative business model, criticism from human rights activists has mounted. A recent study commissioned by the German Development Ministry confirmed years of reports by Cambodian civil society groups that the microfinance sector is responsible for debt-driven land sales at the staggering rate of 1 sale every 16 minutes over the past 5 years. An alarming, unacceptable situation. Up to 50% of the 2.8 million indebted households are over-indebted, leading to intimidation by credit officers, child labor, forced migration, food insecurity, and discontinuation of children's education. The AIIB invested millions despite numerous well-documented human rights abuses related to land grabbing and abusive debt collection. Nor did the bank care that the microfinance institutions in which it invested were being formally investigated by the IFC's Compliance Advisor Ombudsman for the same allegations. The IFC is the commercial arm of the World Bank. Against this background, how serious is the AIIB about its environmental and social standards here? And who monitors their implementation by the microfinance providers?
In the whole project documentation, it's said that they have to adhere to the environmental and social frameworks and the other stuff, but it's a black box. It's even less accessible documentation than there is with the bank itself, and we can't control what's been done there.
Let's recap. The AIIB wants to be a development bank lauded for its clean, green, and lean business model, a bank for sustainable projects, a bank that improves people's lives. But is it living up to all these promises? As we have seen and heard from affected people on the ground, no. Perhaps the bank is not lacking in good intentions, but it systemically fails to deliver. Neither its environmental policies nor its social standards nor its proclaimed Paris alignment pass the litmus test. The AIIB is proving to be a bank with a problematic governance structure and weak oversight mechanisms. Promises of transparency towards civil society remain unfulfilled. So, what was the outcome of the meeting between the bank, shareholders, and civil society in Berlin? The shareholder side, represented by high-ranking officials from European finance ministries and members of the German Bundestag, emphasized that the bank's commitment to strict environmental and social standards was primarily due to the European members. When asked about tougher sanctions for inadequate implementation of these standards, the parliamentarians gave rather general answers. None of them thought it was wise to leave the bank at this point. Some in the room felt that this outcome of the discussion was worthy of criticism.
They seemed unsure if they have any real clout, even as shareholders, within the structure of the AIIB. Did they feel that they can actually bring about change? I don't think so. I didn't get that impression.
The AIIB management stated that the bank is apolitical and that there is no Chinese dominance. Unfortunately, as the bank specializes in infrastructure projects, resettlement could not be avoided. However, the bank promised to respond more quickly to any problems that arise in the future through monitoring by its own local representatives. In one area in particular, the vice president acknowledged the need for change.
I think we have made quite some efforts over the last couple of years and quite some progress. But it is true that the engagement with CSOs and NGOs has not been as forceful as we should have done it, and we will change this now.
We are a learning institution, we hear you, we try our best. So those are nice words to lull us in and to get us in, but they have to act on what they are doing. And until they don't do this, I don't take it for granted. We still have to push and to push strongly.
If this bank really wants to build infrastructure for tomorrow, it needs to create prosperity for the people and not for the clients.